The chandeliers above the dining hall glittered like captured stars, their light pouring down on polished wood floors and white linen tables. The air smelled of roasted duck and wine. Laughter rippled from one end of the room to the other as waiters glided between tables, carrying plates of steak and champagne flutes that never seemed to empty. It was Mark's 40th birthday, and the family had spared no expense. I sat at the far end of the table with a small cup of coffee cooling in front of me. The steam had thinned long ago, but I held the cup anyway, the warmth steady in my hand. Around me, relatives clapped as Mark accepted another gift, another pat on the back, another cheer for the golden sun. He was glowing under the attention, wearing a tailored navy suit, the kind I never could have justified buying for myself. His laugh filled the room, smooth and easy, practiced for gatherings like this. Linda rose to her feet, her wineglass catching the light. Conversations hushed, as if on command. She looked at Mark with a smile that belonged to him alone, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "To my son, the pride of this family." The room erupted again. Forks clinked, glasses lifted high, aunts dabbed their eyes. I watched quiet, my face still and my hand steady on the cup. The applause swelled and then softened into low chatter. Waiters swept in with dessert trays balanced like offerings. Cheesecake, chocolate torts, layered slices crowned with sugar roses. The sweet scent filled the room, yet my stomach sat heavy. I reached for the water glass instead, listening as cousins leaned in to Mark, eager to toast him again. That was when a man in a crisp black suit approached from my right. He held a leather folder, his expression polite but firm. He stopped at my chair and lowered it before me. His voice was quiet but clear. "Sir, the check." The folder rested against my hand like a stone. I opened it, the number printed in sharp black ink staring back at me. $2,050. My eyes lingered on the figure, then slid to the neatly printed line beneath the suggestion of 22% gratuity. My chest tightened, though I kept my face calm. A silence thin but cutting settled around our table. A cousin across from me raised her brows, then glanced away quickly. To my left, David cleared his throat, but said nothing. Mark went on smiling, glass in hand, speaking to an uncle about his next big idea, as if the folder in front of me didn't exist. I heard the scrape of a chair. Linda leaned closer, her perfume sharp in the air, her hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. Her voice was low, meant only for me. "Robert, go on, pay it just like always." I kept my eyes on the folder. The numbers swam for a moment before sharpening again. I could feel the heat rising in my face, though I did not move. Around the table, no one spoke. Jessica tapped at her phone, pretending distraction. David stared into his glass. The younger cousins whispered until their parents hushed them. I looked up slowly, scanning the room. Some relatives avoided my gaze, shifting in their seats, hiding behind napkins or bites of cake. Others gave me a fleeting look of sympathy before dropping their eyes. The manager of the restaurant lingered near the doorway, watching the table with the careful attention of someone who knew a storm might break at any moment. Mark finally glanced my way, his smile unchanged, his hand still resting around the stem of his glass. He gave me the kind of nod that suggested he expected nothing less than my compliance. The room felt smaller, then the air thicker. My hand pressed lightly on the folder, but I did not lift it. Linda's words hung between us, sharper than any toast, heavier than the weight of the chandeliers overhead. I sat back, my coffee cold, my pulse steady, the silence around me louder than the jazz playing from the speakers. The number on that bill was more than dollars. It was years, decades, a ledger of sacrifices written in ink I could never erase. I breathed once, steady and slow, and the chatter of the room returned faintly to my ears. Dessert plates clinked, glasses tipped back, Mark's laugh rose again. But the folder in front of me remained a demand and a test, waiting for my answer. I let my hand rest on the leather, and the noise of the room faded to a dull hum. I was 20 the first time I walked through the gates on the south side. The mill crouched by the river like a beast too big to move. A foreman pointed me toward a line that felt a mile long, and I learned fast that you kept your mouth shut, your back straight, and your hands where the work needed them. The first week, I burned my palms and did not tell anyone. The first month, I learned the rhythm of the rollers, the shiver of a crane cable when a load was too heavy. I took the swing shift because it paid a little more, and when they asked for overtime, I said yes before they finished the sentence. I remember counting out bills at the kitchen table of a one-bedroom walk-up rent paid in cash, and a jar where I stuffed the leftover ones for the electric bill. I met my first wife at a church picnic near Calumet Park. We married in a small ceremony in late summer. I wore a suit I bought secondhand. We started a family in a narrow house with a porch that leaned a little to the left. Paychecks came on Fridays and were mostly gone by Sunday night. Diapers formula. She took in mending on the side. I pulled double shifts when the foreman came around. We scraped together the down payment for a real mortgage. By the mid-'80s, I could lift a coil with my eyes closed, which is to say, I knew when to move and when not to. We had 3 kids by then. I ironed a shirt in the dark and left before dawn to catch the bus. When hours were cut, I painted houses on weekends. When a neighbor needed help laying a walkway, I stayed until the last paver was set. I learned early that a father is measured by the receipts he keeps, and the ones he never shows anyone. You do not say that out loud. You show up. You change your boots. You keep going. Time had a way of leaning forward. Mark grew into cleats and then out of them. He wanted a car before he wanted a diploma. That summer he turned 16, and the parking lot at his high school became a parade of dented sedans and hand-me-downs from uncles. He looked at me with an expectation he barely tried to hide. I looked at my bank account, and then at the tools in the garage, and I picked up extra hours wherever anyone would have me. I found a used Ford Taurus year 2000 shown tan, paint a little rust near the wheel. Well, nothing a wire brush and a Saturday could not improve. The seller wanted $3,200. I bargained him down with the kind of smile that says I know what a failing alternator sounds like. I brought it home with the title tucked in my back pocket. Mark ran a hand over the hood like it was a prize he had won. David stood a few steps back, quiet but happy for his brother. Jessica asked if she could drive it when he was done. I said one at a time and handed Mark the keys. On the third, he called me from a side street off Western, the way a boy calls his father when he wants it to sound like no big deal. The bumper had kissed a light pole in a rain-slicked lot. No one was hurt. The car did. I told him to stay put. I left the dinner table and drove out with a socket set and a flashlight. The metal was bent, but not broken. I told him we would take it to a shop on Monday, and I felt the bill in my shoulder before I saw it in my hand. The mechanic shook his head and said it could have been worse. I signed. It still felt like worse. The mill cut shifts that winter. I learned how to patch drywall from a neighbor and took on small jobs. Nights smelled like joint compound and spilled coffee. We kept the kids in cleats and school trips, and not once did I say, "We cannot." I said, "We will figure it out." I said, "Get some rest." I said, "Tomorrow." In those years, I did not buy myself much. A pair of boots when the soles tore through. A jacket when the zipper gave up. The furnace ate a Christmas bonus the year it died on New Year's Day. Jessica wanted to apply to DePaul. I filled out financial aid forms and smiled at her acceptance letter like it was my own. I wrote a check for the tuition deposit and told myself it would be fine. The first bill said otherwise. I paid it. Then I paid the next one. She flourished. I slept less. People like to tell young fathers that it gets easier. Sometimes it does. I carried it by stacking shifts and swallowing my pride when the supervisor had nothing for me but a shrug. I carried it when Mark wanted another chance at a business idea, and I believed him because he was my son, and a father believes even when the numbers do not. There were quiet victories, a summer with no late fees, a Christmas where I managed a new bike without putting groceries on the card. I used to keep those moments in a line in my head and run a finger along them when the night went long. The truth that set in tonight at a table covered in linen and glass had started years ago on a kitchen chair with a stub of pencil and a stack of envelopes. I had been balancing ledgers no one else ever saw, shifting and covering and smoothing until the house looked solid from the sidewalk. Watching Mark raise his glass under the chandeliers, I felt the old calm I used to feel at the mill when a load tipped, and you had to decide whether to step in or step back. A waiter slid a plate of cheesecake near my elbow, and I waved it away. The leather folder stayed where it was. My hand hovered above it, and then settled on the table. I thought of the first time I counted pay on a Friday, and left a 20 in the drawer as a surprise for my wife to find a tiny rebellion against the grind. I thought of Mark standing by a scuffed bumper, looking more annoyed than sorry. I thought of David lining up for his community college placement test with a used backpack and a quiet spine. I thought of Jessica walking across a stage with a degree and a smile that looked like possibility. All of it sat in my chest, beside the number on the page. I have never been good at speeches. The mill taught me that talk burns faster than coal. So I sat, and I let the old facts stand in front of me until they found their shape. For a moment I could hear that picnic laughter near the lake where my life began, and I could hear the chorus of machines that built its middle. The room around me returned in layers. I looked up and saw the waiter waiting with the patience of someone trained to be invisible. I folded my hands together and felt the oil and grit of years that had not quite washed out. Then I raised my eyes past him to the son I had lifted and carried and funded and forgiven more times than I could count. Somewhere inside, a gear slid into place. I did not move the folder. I steadied my breath and turned my chair a fraction toward the center of the table. I listened for the part of the room that mattered. That quiet had a rhythm I knew. My first wife lay thin and fierce in the bed. She never lost the fire in her eyes. I sat in the plastic chair and wrapped both hands around hers. The skin was paper and heat together. She looked at me like she had when we first danced on a church floor, and told me in that voice that never wasted a word, to keep my dignity, to never let anyone turn what I gave into something small. I nodded because I could not find anything else in my throat. She was gone before the thaw. The house turned into a place that sounded wrong. The kids moved through those days with that special care children learn too soon, speaking softly, watching my face for weather. I learned to fold their shirts the way she did. I learned how to answer the kinds of questions that had always been hers. You tell yourself the body learns new work. The mind does too slower. I kept her ring in the top drawer of the old dresser wrapped in a square of handkerchief. It did not make anything easier. It did make things clearer. It reminded me of the way we had built a life by choosing each other over ease. I met Linda at a neighborhood barbecue a few years after the funeral. She was organized and sharp, the sort of person who could turn a potluck into a plan without breaking a sweat. She liked order. She liked results. Her certainty felt like shelter after seasons of drift. My kids were kind to her at first. It became clear in subtle ways that she saw our family as a project that required leadership. She praised Mark for his ideas and his charm. She told Jessica she was destined for something bigger. David smiled and said he was fine with less. He meant it. That did not make the balance right. When money came up, it was never an abstract thing in Linda's world. It was a tool. The words found their targets. Mark and Jessica stood taller. There was a night when Mark was 18 and staring at a brochure for a business program that cost more than any cents. I agreed to a loan that made my chest tight. Months later, he changed his mind and changed his major and then changed it again. The bill did not change. It arrived in a windowed envelope with my name steady as ever. Jessica thrived on praise. When she got into DePaul, Linda hosted a little party on our porch with lemonade and finger sandwiches and neighbors who had never visited before. I grilled hot dogs and kept smiling while the numbers in my pocket throbbed like a tooth. She was worth every check, I told myself. With Linda, the house ran on a schedule that kept everything polished. Birthdays had themes. Holidays had spreadsheets. It meant the kids were never without, and that was something to be grateful for. It also meant that need turned into an argument that I lost before it started. If Mark wanted seed money for a second try at a shop, the justification arrived already typed up. If David asked for nothing, Linda called him selfless, and then asked if he would mind covering a shift for someone else. He said sure and meant it. I watched and kept my mouth shut too often. Tonight at the restaurant, I could feel the shape of those years moving under the tablecloth. She looked at Mark the way a coach looks at the fastest runner. Now it felt like management. The number in the folder carried the weight of all the smaller numbers that had led us here. I thought of the last morning in that hospital room, when the nurse changed the sheets with practiced hands, and my wife asked for the window shade lifted so she could watch the light open the snow. She squeezed my fingers and told me to be kind to myself in the way you say a thing that is both simple and almost impossible. I had forgotten more than I realized. I had not forgotten her ring. Before leaving for this party, I had opened the top drawer to find cufflinks, and my hand brushed the handkerchief. I unwrapped it just enough to see the circle of gold. I held it for a breath and then put it back. I told myself I would remember what it meant when it mattered. Linda's perfume drifted toward me again and brought me back to the table. A server refilled Mark's glass. David rubbed a thumb along the rim of his water glass and stared at the tablecloth. I felt a shift inside like a gear engaging. The folder did not move. It did not need to. I set both hands flat on the linen and let my shoulders settle. I could hear the words from that winter as clearly as if the hospital machine still hummed beside me. Do not let anyone shrink what you give. Do not let them turn your love into a bill. The band changed songs, and the room swayed to something slower. A cousin stood and stretched and sat again. The manager at the doorway checked on us with a quick glance and then looked away. I slid my chair an inch closer to the table so I could see their faces without lifting my chin. The old drawer upstairs was far from this place, but the cool memory of that ring sat under my pulse like a compass. I did not speak yet. I let the moment breathe until it could hear itself. I let my breath settle and let the table drift into a soft blur while my mind stepped back to smaller rooms and cheaper birthdays. He learned fast that his cry brought 3 people running. I would stand in the doorway and watch him sleep. When he woke and reached, I lifted him without thinking. It felt natural to give. He grew into a boy who loved applause. If Linda was there later, her claps were crisp and pointed, as if she were training the world to understand who deserved attention. That pride started clean. It picked up grit as the years moved. David came 2 years after Mark. He had a quiet grin and the sort of patience that makes teachers relax. He did not ask for applause. Jessica arrived last, a storm contained in a small body. She and Linda fit together in a way that made the house feel organized and pretty. Lists began to appear on the fridge. Birthdays had themes drawn in ink. Jessica glided through that care like a skater on clean ice. The split showed itself in errands and allowances, and the way car keys moved through hands. Linda decided the case looked cheap and bought a new one the next day. Jessica wanted a jacket everyone at school had, and Linda said a girl should learn how to present herself. I told myself I was seeing patterns that did not matter. I was wrong. Shoes hit the mat, lunch bags opened and closed. He learned that a look could open doors. If dinner ran late, he would say he was fine, then jog to catch the last bus home from his volunteer shift, tutoring younger kids. Linda arranged rides and ensembles and soft light for photos. The year Mark turned 16, he started to talk about freedom, like it was a prize he had earned by being oldest. He left car magazines on the coffee table the way people leave hints. I went through the bills and the drawer where I kept small salvations, and the month already ran heavy. I still found that Ford Taurus old but stubborn, and I made it ours. Mark slid into the driver's seat with a sigh that sounded like relief and triumph braided together. He thanked me quickly, the kind of thanks that assumes the rest of the world is working as it should. David watched from the stoop with his hands in his pockets. He did not ask why he had no keys of his own. He meant it. I still felt something like guilt rise and ask to be answered. School events sharpened the contrast. Mark tried football, and the bleachers loved him whether he played well or not. She told anyone within earshot that Mark had a way of turning effort into results. He brought the certificate home folded, so it would not crease, and Linda smiled and said it was nice. I said it was more than nice. He smiled and shrugged and asked what was for dinner. Jessica hit high school with a map in mind. The list was good. The bills that followed were not. She flourished there from 2006 to 2010. I wrote checks that collected in a shoebox, like a brick road to a finish line I wanted for her. Every time a statement came, Linda would set it on the table and tap the total with a nail and talk about investment and necessary costs. I nodded because I wanted that horizon to stay open for Jessica. I told myself a father does this. Meanwhile, David sent in his application to the community college on the west side, got in, and bought used textbooks that still had other people's notes in the margins. If he needed help, he never asked. He would find it and come to me that night and say he must have misplaced a 20 and did I need it back. I said, "Keep it, kid." He said only if I was sure. He always let me be sure. Time kept its steady march. Mark asked for capital for one idea after another. Linda made charts on the dining table and spoke about momentum. She called him our brightest asset, and the words had a shine that reflected into his smile. I looked at the numbers and then at his face and thought about the way a father's belief can be a kind of fuel. Sometimes fuel burns fast. There is a moment I still see when I close my eyes. It is late afternoon in summer, and the porch stoop is warm under us. Mark sits on the top step with a set of keys flipping around his finger. David stands on the sidewalk with a bus pass in his palm, like a ticket to a quieter world. He looks up at the clouds the way boys do when they are deciding where their edges are. He catches me watching and gives a half smile that says he knows more than he says. Linda comes out with iced tea and a stack of envelopes. She hands one to Mark and says a community mentor has offered to introduce him to someone in hospitality. She hands one to Jessica and says there is information on study abroad. She pats David on the shoulder and tells him the hardware manager spoke well. sets the bills on the table beside me and says we will make it work. I do not pretend I was blameless in the tilt that followed. I was tired, and I wanted the path to be smooth for them, and when a father wants that, he can lose sight of what he is paving. I said yes too often. I said we will figure it out. I said we will make it work. The trouble is that work has to come from somewhere. Usually it comes from the same pair of hands. The memory settles and the restaurant returns with the slow focus of a lens. Mark is still the boy who loves applause, just dressed in a suit that carries it better. Jessica still angles for the best light. David still chooses the edge of the room where he can see all exits. I recognize the old lines running under the linen and glass. I place one fingertip on the folder to still it, as if it were a skittering tool on a workbench. I look at the three of them and understand that the next words I choose will not only pay for a meal, they will settle a balance that has been off for years. I remembered the year the first idea arrived. In 2012, Mark said he had found a small storefront off Milwaukee Avenue where foot traffic would do the work if we helped it along. He had plans printed on glossy paper and numbers that lined up neatly in columns. He spoke about curated selections and neighborhood loyalty, and told me the landlord was flexible if we moved fast. Linda set out a pad on the dining table and called it a family decision. I looked at my pay stubs and my retirement statements, and the part of me that had always wanted my children to start farther along than I did raised its hand. The loan officer wore a red tie and a smile that never moved. He talked about opportunity and risk and asked whether we had skin in the game. I said we did. He asked how much. I walked out of the bank with a promise in my pocket that was heavier than the keys I carried. I signed anyway. 40,000 moved out of a future and into a present that had already started ordering shelves. We painted together that spring. He ordered cases from distributors I had never heard of. The opening day felt like a parade. Friends came and neighbors came and strangers peeked in and bought something just to be kind. The second month looked different. Summer slowed and rent did not. A delivery arrived late and a shipment arrived early, and the cash register did not have enough inside to be polite to both. Mark called me at 9 at night and said we needed a bridge until foot traffic picked up. I transferred money. Mark stacked boxes in the back and said we were close. We were not. There was a week when the lights went out at closing time because the bill had missed the grace period. He told me not to worry, and I did anyway. I came by the next morning with coffee and a check for the utility and helped him write a sign about temporary hours. I watched him talk to a customer with that easy charm that had worked so well when he was 16 and wanted the world to choose him. Numbers do not make that mistake. Autumn brought football and school traffic and no miracle. Mark talked about introducing a small tasting corner. The landlord talked about a late fee. I learned the path from the bank to the shop without thinking. There is a point when you are not smoothing a season. You are dragging it behind you. We reached that point and then kept going. We closed just before Thanksgiving. Mark stood in the empty space with his hands in his pockets and said he had learned a lot. I said that was something. He looked at me and said we had given it a good run. I nodded and carried the last box to the truck. I told myself time would mend this. It did not. It quieted it. Years turned and we made another Christmas. David sent me a photo of a classroom he had decorated with his students, where paper snowflakes hung from fishing line and looked like careful weather. Mark sent a short message about a new connection. When Linda mentioned that the market had changed in favor of delivery services, and that there was a way to open small and scale quickly, I felt my shoulders draw up before my mind caught up. In 2018, Mark brought another plan to the table. He said the old location had been wrong. He said Logan Square was ready. He said the bank would offer better terms now that he had experience. Linda said we were only a signature away from helping a son meet his potential. Co-signing means you stand up when someone else is called. It means you agree to bleed at the same time as a person who says he will not need your vein. I signed. The build-out began, and Mark sent photos with captions that made progress seem like destiny. I visited on weekends. Launch day came with balloons and a ribbon and a friend with a camera. The first week had the hum again. Then winter set its jaw and foot traffic slipped. A delivery company changed its fee structure. That curve on the projection began to flatten. Mark said we would pivot. He said we needed a short-term boost. The bank said the payment schedule was not a suggestion. I walked into a branch and withdrew savings I had kept for a different kind of emergency. I kept a stack of statements in a folder in the hall closet. One evening I pulled it down and spread the papers across the table and felt my stomach go hard. The retirement account looked like a field after a storm. The numbers had been uprooted and tossed, and some of them were simply gone. She said Mark would turn the corner with one more push. I stared at the print until the lines blurred and returned. I told her I heard her. What I did not say was that I could feel something else in me standing up. The second shop limped another season and then fell. The landlord this time did not shake my hand. He sent a notice and a bill for damages that existed only in wording. I paid it because I did not want his voice in my mailbox anymore. Mark said he was sorry in a way that sounded like exhaustion and hope mixed until both lost their edge. He said learning was good. He said he would find a better lane. I said he should. There are moments that do not announce themselves as turning points, but still change the angle of your days. For me, it was a simple act. I opened the folder one last time that winter and ran a finger down a column of debits and fees. I heard again the sound a roller makes when a load begins to slip. You either brace or you move. If you keep pretending the line will hold, you get crushed with it. A waiter reached toward the folder on the linen beside my hand and asked if I needed anything else. I closed the memory like a drawer. The chandeliers kept shining. Mark lifted his glass and smiled unchanged. Linda watched me with a tilt of the head that had always meant she expected a yes. I laid my palm flat on the table to feel something solid, and the room came into focus, as if the lens had finally settled. Mark lifted his wrist so the light caught the face of a new watch, and a circle of cousins leaned in. He told them he had found it at a boutique off Oak Street. A cousin laughed and said, "Of course he did." A flute appeared at my elbow and then moved on when I kept my hand on the coffee cup. I sat near the end, where the servers had room to turn. From there I could see all of them. Linda circling with a smile that landed in short bursts. Mark basking. Jessica bright and certain. David near the wall. The manager glanced over again, a polite question in his posture. A waiter surfaced at my side with that same quiet grace as before and asked if he could warm my coffee. I said hot water would do. He nodded and slipped away. I thanked him. He said my pleasure and vanished. Napkins fell in laps. Someone started a chant of a name and then stopped when Linda lifted her hand for the room to soften. Pride, grit, talent, future. Mark raised his glass and said he would keep making the family proud. He thanked his mother who had always believed. I let the folder rest against my wrist. The leather was warm now. I could feel the edge of paper through it. A thought opened as clean as a door. I have been invited to pay not to belong. It did not come bitter. It came simple, like a label on a drawer after years of reaching and guessing. I set the folder back flat so it would not slide. Linda moved behind me and put a hand on my shoulder, as if adjusting a painting that was slightly off-center. She told me not to worry, and that the restaurant would close out soon, and it was better if we handled it smoothly. Her tone was friendly for the room and firm for me. I nodded in a way that meant I had heard every word and had not agreed to any of them. The cake arrived carried high by 2 servers. People stood and sang a little off-key, which is the only honest way for a family to sing. Mark took a breath as if surprised by the attention he had been calling to himself all night. He closed his eyes for a wish and opened them to applause that he had not had to earn. A slice paused at my place. I shook my head once. The waiter nodded and moved it on. David slid closer by a chair, not enough to make a scene enough to be near. He asked if I needed anything. I told him I was fine and asked if he was eating. He said he had already had more than he should. He glanced at the folder and then at my face. He did not ask. He knew better than to make the obvious a conversation before it needed to be one. A cousin raised a toast to Mark's next chapter, and a joke about the third time being the charm rippled through the chairs. Mark laughed in the easy way of a man who has never paid full price for his own mistakes. The manager approached with careful neutrality and asked if everything was to our liking. His eyes slid to the folder and back to my face. I said everything was fine. He said, "Take your time." I lifted my water and let the cold sit on my tongue. The faces around me blurred and sharpened with each blink. I saw Mark as a boy on a baseball diamond, throwing a glance to the bleachers to see if applause was ready. I saw him now in a suit that caught light practicing success, even when the numbers had not learned the script. The jazz shifted to something gentle. The room kept moving. I sat still inside it the way a worker stands on a steel platform, while tons of metal slide by, and trusts his feet to the paint marks he knows. Linda returned to my side with the soft voice she used when calming a baby, a tone that had calmed me once or twice in the first years after the funeral, when simple tasks felt like mountains. She said, "Let us not stretch this, Robert." She said everyone had enjoyed a beautiful night, and it would be a shame to spoil it with logistics. She said we can go on to the lounge if we wrap here. I did not look at her. I slid the folder open and read the figure again as if it might have changed under a different light. I found the number for my coffee on the second page and did the math in my head. It came clean and quick. 15 with tax. A relative down the table asked if we had visited the new exhibit at the museum, and another said, "Not yet," and another said they would go next weekend. I thought of the folders at home in the hall closet, and of the drawer where the ring lay wrapped. I thought of the instruction I had carried from a winter that had taught me which parts of a life can be saved and which must be let go. The waiter who had brought the hot water stopped a few feet away and pretended to align a stack of plates. He was giving me a minute the way a good foreman gives a cat the space to decide how to lift without getting hurt. I appreciated it more than he knew. I closed the folder again and placed my fingertips on the leather. For the first time all evening, I felt something like air move easily in my chest. Mark told a story about a weekend in Lake Geneva, and the table laughed at the part where he forgot where he parked and found the car by following the sound of its own alarm. Linda laughed the loudest and then touched my shoulder again, as if reminding me of my cue. I did not get up. I let the laughter fall and the clink of a spoon take its place. When the quiet settled to the level where truth can be heard, I lifted my eyes and found my son across the table. I kept my hand on the folder and let my shoulders square. She said we should not drag this out, and that it would be better for everyone if I took care of the bill. I told her I would pay for what I ordered and nothing more. I placed them on the linen by my water glass. I added a single to cover the difference and told the waiter when he returned to keep the change for the staff. She said Dad always handles it, and that this was not the night to be difficult. David looked at me. His expression asked if I was sure. He said we had a rhythm for these things, and that I should not break it now of all nights. I told him the rhythm was the problem. He said I must be joking. I said I was not. I said the bill belonged to the man being toasted and to the people who had eaten the cake and emptied the bottles. I said my coffee had been worth $15 and that I had paid for it. The rest was not mine. She said not to embarrass the family. I said paying for my own erasure was the only embarrassment left on the table. Aunt Rosa, who has never been able to keep a secret, whispered that perhaps the host should handle it. On the far side of the table, a niece started to clap on instinct and stopped after 2 quiet taps. The band eased into a slower number, the kind that leaves room for voices. He said this was ridiculous and that any other father would be proud to show generosity. I told him a father shows pride in many ways. One of them is refusing to fund disrespect. Another is teaching a grown man to stand on his own feet in nice shoes. She tried again, softer, saying I could make things right and that she would repay me in the future. I told her the house did not accept future promises for past debts any longer. David said that I had done more than enough for a very long time. Cousin Leo, who tends to back winners, looked from Mark to me and seemed briefly unsure which was which. Across from him, a woman I barely knew met my eyes. She said we had always been a unit and that my refusal would be remembered. I told her I hoped so. I told her patterns are hard to see until someone interrupts them, and that tonight was that interruption. I said it without heat. If there was any left in me, it was the kind that forges, not the kind that burns. He said he left his card in his coat and laughed a thin sound, waiting for a rescuer. Jessica reached for her purse slowly, the way a person reaches for a prop that has always been handed to them by someone else. Linda looked at me as if willing me to blink first. I did not. I took the cash for my coffee and placed it neatly inside the folder with the receipt, then set the leather squarely in front of Mark again. I told him the number on that page did not belong to me, and that it never had. I told him I would not steal that lesson from him. A cousin down the table said softly that this felt right. Another hissed his name as if the syllables were a curtain to pull shut. The 2 youngest kids at the end had fallen asleep, their heads heavy on their mother's lap, small proofs that peace can exist even in the middle of a family storm. Mark lifted his eyes to mine and asked if I really wanted this to be the memory of his 40th. I told him the memory was his to make. He could remember paying for the party he enjoyed, or he could remember expecting his father to pay for a life he had already lived. Either way, the remembering would be his. She said there would be consequences at home. I said home was where respect lived. I said if it moved out, I would not follow it into the street. Her lips pressed into a line that said the conversation was not over. I did not answer that look. I was done having silent conversations that cost me money. The waiter stepped in then as gently as a nurse and asked if we needed anything else. I told him that my portion was settled and that the folder sat with the right person. He glanced at Mark, who pretended to adjust his cuff. The waiter inclined his head. Someone at the neighboring table started a toast to a birthday in their group, and the room answered with cheer that had nothing to do with us. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. Not joy exactly, but the space that comes when a weight shifts and decides at last to sit where it belongs. David came to stand beside my chair, a quiet presence. He did not say anything. I did not either. We watched Mark open the folder, watch the number rise up again, and look for a ladder that no one held. Linda's hand hovered above his shoulder, not quite landing. Jessica checked her phone. I reached for my water, took a slow drink, and set the glass down square on the linen. The room moved on. A few relatives drifted toward the coat check. Chairs scraped softly. The chandeliers kept their steady glitter, as if none of us mattered to them at all. I kept my seat and let the new balance hold. Chairs scraped, and a hush pressed itself over the table again. Linda shifted into the space between me and Mark and said that I had embarrassed the family after everything she had done to make the night perfect. I told her I had paid for my coffee and service and that the rest was not mine. The manager said he could separate the checks if that would help. I thanked him and said that my portion was already settled and that the remaining balance belonged with the guest of honor and his party. Mark stood and announced to no one and everyone that he would grab his wallet from his coat. Jessica began to gather small bills from two cousins. I told her to stop, that this was not a collection. David cleared his throat. Linda leaned down and said that I had picked the worst possible moment to make a point. I said a point is not worth making if it only works on quiet days. She said that I had humiliated my son. I said I had declined to fund him. She said those two things were the same. I did not answer. The manager asked if we wanted to run a single card or divide it. I said one card for the remainder and touched the folder in front of Mark's empty chair. Mark came back, holding his coat over one arm, and said he had switched wallets earlier and needed a minute to check the car. I said that whoever paid this time would own the memory in full. Aunt Rosa tilted her head toward me and murmured that pride can make a meal bitter. I told her that dignity has fed me better than dessert. Mark returned again, this time with a card in hand he said would work. I told him the difference had been covered by me for a long time, and that tonight it belonged somewhere else. The manager offered the terminal, and Mark slid the card. Approved blinked onto the screen in green. The manager said thank you and handed him the slip. He said that of course he would handle it, that it was never in question. The cousins exhaled. Linda turned back to me and said that we would discuss this at home. I told her that I had already said what needed saying. She said that families act as one. I said that one person had been doing the acting for a very long time and that I had retired from that kind of theater. The waiter who had brought my hot water appeared with 2 small boxes and asked if anyone would like leftover cake packed. I told him that I was fine and thanked him for the care he had shown all night. He nodded once and said that he hoped the rest of my evening would be peaceful. David asked if I needed a ride. I told him I had driven and that I would be all right. He said he would follow me out to the lot anyway. Jessica brushed past us with a bright goodbye to the table and a softer frown in my direction. Mark shook hands with relatives on his way to the door. He laughed at something a cousin said and checked his phone. He did not look at me. That omission had the weight of tradition and felt lighter than it used to. I reached for my jacket and slid my arms into the sleeves slowly. At the coat check, the attendant handed me my wool and wished me a good night. I thanked her and stepped into the corridor. The music dulled to a distant throb, and the smell shifted from butter and wine to cold air and marble cleaner. David walked beside me. We pushed through the glass doors, and the January night took us in. The sidewalk outside the hotel was wet with melt. Taxis idled at the curb, a steady growl in the throat of the city. The magnificent mile glittered in the way it always does. My breath made small clouds in front of me and left them behind to vanish. David asked if I was steady. I told him I was. He said that he was proud of me. It landed where it needed to. He offered his hand and I took it and squeezed once. He told me to text when I got home. I told him I would. Behind us, the doors opened again, and Linda's voice flowed out bright as if nothing had happened. She guided a group toward the lounge. Mark laughed on cue. Jessica's heels clipped the floor like punctuation. I watched their reflections move across the glass and then vanish. We walked to our cars. I unlocked the truck and climbed in. David waited by his sedan until my engine turned. He lifted a hand and then headed south. I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, the radio off, the hotel lights a blur on the windshield. I let it pass. Then I put the truck in gear and eased into the river of lights, heading toward home. The highway thinned, and the city peeled back to the quieter blocks where the sidewalks know your shoes. I parked by the curb and sat for a breath, the tick of the cooling engine loud in the empty car. The kitchen clock said a little past 11. The red light on the landline blinked. A cheerful voice introduced herself from Lakeshore Realty and said she was following up to confirm Friday at 10 for the in-home valuation and a chat about current comps in Portage Park. She hoped the packet had arrived and that the preliminary net sheet made sense. She said she was happy to walk me and my wife through the numbers. I pulled the top page free, comparative market analysis across the header. A handwritten note on a sticky square that said, "Confirm availability," and a smiley face in a tidy script that was not mine. Beneath that, an unsigned exclusive right to sell agreement with 2 empty lines waiting for names that belonged to me alone. I slid it open and took out the deed, the one from 19, with my name and my first wife's, and the stamp that made a house a home in the eyes of the county. After she died, the title passed to me. Linda never asked to be added. She did not need to, while there was never any question of who kept the lights on. I slept like a man listening for something. I swept the front stoop out of habit and brought in the mail. I left it unopened and made eggs. 2 days slid by in errands and small repairs, the kind of days that look like nothing and mean a lot. On the 3rd evening, I pulled into the driveway to find Linda's car already there. From the front hall, I heard her voice from the kitchen, bright and quick, the voice she keeps for plans. I stopped in the hallway and listened the way you listen to check if a burner is still on. Linda told Jessica that the market was right and that the agent said we could clear more than she had hoped even after fees. She said the goal was to get ahead of maintenance while values were high. She said the phrase "empty nest" as if it were a spreadsheet row. Jessica asked whether I would sign or whether I needed a nudge. The 2 of them laughed softly and then lowered their voices, which made them easier to hear. Linda said they would frame it as an evaluation, just paperwork, to allow an appraiser to step inside. She said once the process started, it would be easier to keep it rolling. She said Robert hates fuss and will want this to be smooth. Jessica said if they timed it right, they could have an offer by spring and liquid cash for Mark's next move and for her to shift to a different role at work that paid less but looked better on a resume. She said it might be good for me to be somewhere with stairs only to the basement so they could keep an eye on me. That line hung in the air like a hook waiting for a fish that never asked to swim there. I stepped backward quiet on the old runner and walked to the living room. From the kitchen came the murmur of Linda's yeses and hems as she confirmed a meeting. She ended the call with a cheerful "see you" and humming the kind she saves for a job well done. When she came into the living room, she was surprised to see me, and surprised again that I did not announce myself with a smile. She asked how traffic had been. I said thick. She asked if I wanted dinner. I said later. She tilted her head the way she does when she looks for a script to hand me. I had lost it somewhere between the driveway and the kitchen doorway. She went upstairs to sort laundry. I sat with my hands flat on my knees until the blood felt like it belonged to me again. Then I walked to the hall table and opened the drawer. The deed slid out like a quiet friend. I took it to the kitchen and laid it beside the unsigned agreement. 2 languages sat together on the wood. One spoke of ownership with the weight of ink, and the other spoke of intention dressed as help. The landline lit up again. Another message from the same agent this time confirming that she would bring a colleague and that she looked forward to meeting us. I deleted it, and the silence after grew heavy and sure. I went back to the hall and lifted the receiver on the old line and turned the ringer volume down until it clicked. I am not a man who likes tricks. I am a man who has learned that noise can drown out the one sound that matters if you let it. Footsteps came down the stairs. Linda stood in the doorway with a basket on her hip and told me that someone from the office might stop by Friday for a quick look at the furnace, a routine check. She said it would be good to have the place tidy. I told her the furnace had had its tune-up in October. She said there was no harm in another set of eyes. I told her I would be here. She asked about Mark's party as if we had been at different events. I said it was done. She looked at the papers on the table and then at Mitsu. Her eyes made a small calculation and then cleared. She said she would finish upstairs and left the room with the same measured steps she uses in a store when she has already decided to buy. I gathered the papers into 2 stacks. The agreement went back under the clip. The deed went back to the drawer. I closed it gently and felt the click in my palm. The house answered with a small settling, a sound I have known for decades, like an old friend shifting in a chair to get comfortable. I stood there until that sound stopped. In the den, I keep a small notebook that has never been for lists. It is where I write the single line that tells me who I am when days try to say otherwise. I opened it and wrote a date and a sentence in letters that could hold their own. Then I closed it and set it on the shelf beside a picture of my first wife in sunlight hair, bright as copper eyes, telling me to keep my dignity. I told the room that I had not forgotten. The hour had slipped past dinner and into that thin time between obligations. I turned off the kitchen light, and the house fell into soft outlines. Upstairs, a drawer slid shut. I stood in the doorway and let the quiet hold. There are moments when you decide in the smallest way that changes everything. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled until a familiar name waited under my thumb. I did not press call. Not yet. I put the phone face down on the counter and rested both hands beside it until my pulse matched the clock. Then I picked up the deed one more time and returned it to the drawer, as if returning a tool to the right slot after years of borrowing. Morning cracked open in a thin band of gray, and I stood at the sink with my phone in my hand. She answered with a hello that always sounds ready to help. I asked if she had time today. I told her I needed to protect the house and that I would rather talk in person. She said, "Come by the office near the river," and I said I would be there by 10. She hugged me the way family does when there is work to do and asked what happened. I told her about the realtor packet and the valuation call and the plan to move me to a basement as if I were a water heater that needed monitoring. I told her I had the deed in a drawer and no intention of letting strangers measure my living room. She said we would start with a living trust in my name so the house would sit inside a structure I control. She said we would prepare a new deed to transfer title from me as individual to me as trustee. She said we would record it at the county building and that no sale could happen without my signature as trustee. She added that we would draft a will that pours anything left into the trust and powers of attorney, so no one else could make decisions for me unless I chose it. I asked about cost and time. She said her fee would be modest because I was family, and that recording fees were set by the county. She slid a simple engagement letter across the desk, and I signed with a hand that felt steadier than it had the night before. "Successor trustee," she asked, and I said David. If I was incapacitated, Emily said David would step in as trustee. If I passed, David would manage the trust and follow my instructions. I said I wanted the house to stay in the family only if the people living in it respected it. She said we could include language that requires occupancy by a beneficiary who maintains the property, or the house could be sold and proceeds divided as I decide. I said I would think on the division and name it before we recorded. She said we could amend later, but it was better to be clear now. I told her I wanted to protect David from the weight that has followed me, and I wanted to make sure Mark and Jessica could no longer treat my life as a bank. She asked if I wanted to include a no-contest clause so anyone who challenged the trust would risk losing their share. I said yes. We moved to the power of attorney for property. She explained that it would allow a person I named to handle bills and accounts if I could not. We added a healthcare power of attorney with the same choice. I answered with the memory of a winter room and a woman who wanted the shade lifted so the light could find her. Emily printed the trust and the new deed. The Robert J. Miller Living Trust dated this day. The deed was a simple transfer from me to myself as trustee. She said we would need a notary and witnesses. Her paralegal stepped in with a stamp and a steady hand. I signed the stack in the places that mattered. She asked if I wanted to send a letter to the realtor, canceling any appointments and revoking permission to enter the property. I said yes. She typed a short, clear message that left no room for clever interpretation and printed it on letterhead. I signed, and she emailed it while I watched, then printed a receipt of delivery that hit her inbox a minute later. We gathered everything into a neat stack, and she said we should record the deed today. In the lobby, I emptied my pockets into a plastic tray and lifted my hands like a man who has nothing to hide. When our number blinked onto the screen, we stepped to a counter where a clerk with kind eyes greeted us. Emily presented the deed, the transfer declaration, and my identification. The clerk checked names, checked signatures, checked that the legal description matched the deed on file. She told us the exact fee, and I slid my card across the counter. She ran it and handed me the pen to sign a small receipt. She said the document would be imaged and returned, and that the record would show by the end of the week. Emily asked if I felt lighter. I said I felt like a man who had put a door back on its hinges. She laughed once, warm and proud, then turned practical again. She said next we would update beneficiary designations for accounts and add transfer on death where it made sense. She said she would draft a short letter to Linda, making clear that any sale or valuation required my written consent as trustee. She said I did not need to send it unless pressed. I said I would keep it ready. We stopped at a coffee shop on the walk back and sat with our cups near the window. She asked if I was all right being the one to tell David. I said he had earned the right to hear it from me. She said that if anyone tried to push past me, she would handle it. The way she said handle made me think of her father fixing a hinge without fuss, and I felt a cord tighten into a note that held. Back at her office, she placed the originals in a fireproof envelope and asked if I had a safe place at home. I said I did. She made copies and handed them to me in a folder. She told me to call if the realtor tried again, or if Linda pushed a stranger across our threshold. She said the law stands with the person who owns the door. I stood, shook her hand, and thanked her for standing with me. On the sidewalk, the city kept moving in its usual hurry. I tucked the folder under my arm and walked to the garage, the kind of walk where your steps feel measured by something other than gravity. In the truck, I sat for a moment and let the quiet hold. Then I started the engine and pointed the nose toward the neighborhood where the trees know my name and the porch light waits for my key. Wind tugged at the bare branches as I turned onto my block and eased against the curb. The porch light threw a soft circle on the steps, steady as a heartbeat. Inside, the answering machine blinked again. The realtor said she had received my letter, understood that the appointment was canceled, and would note the file as do not contact. Her voice tried to sound cheerful as it let go. I stood by the counter with the phone in my hand until the kitchen settled around the silence. By Saturday afternoon, Aunt Rosa had called to ask if I was feeling all right, then paused long enough to say that people were still talking about the party. She said some folks thought the moment had been overdue. She lowered her voice and added that others were surprised Mark had not picked up the bill himself at 40. I told her I was fine, and that weather would change when it wanted to. She laughed softly and said that was a good way to put it. News moves through a family like water through a house. It finds every path. On Sunday after church, a neighbor I barely knew patted my arm and said, "Good for you." I asked him what for, and he said for doing what needed to be done. His wife nodded and added that generosity can spoil a man the way too much sun can blister a field. I thanked them and drove home with a paper bag of donuts that tasted better than they should have. Monday brought a voicemail from Mark that sounded like the light had gone out of a room halfway through the call. He said the bank had reviewed his application and wanted stronger collateral than projected revenue. He said their tone had shifted when they pulled his credit and saw late payments. He said the officer hinted that a co-signer would help. He said he would swing by later to talk options. I replayed the message once, then deleted it. My thumb hovered over the phone and then set it down on the counter next to a bowl of oranges. Jessica found me that evening in the kitchen and said I had created a narrative that made her and her brother look like users. She said colleagues at her office had seen a cousin's post and joked that some people had a family finance department. She tried to laugh as she told it, but her eyes did not join the joke. She said that reputation mattered and that I should consider the optics. I reminded her that optics do not pay a bill, and that the easiest way to fix a story is to tell a truer one. She looked at the floor and then asked if I was planning to apologize to Mark. I said no. She said that was cruel. I said it was honest. Mark came by the next afternoon wearing that smile he puts on before a pitch. He stood in the doorway of the living room and said the bank officer had been narrow-minded and that he was close to landing a small partnership that would change the picture. He said, if I co-signed just this once, he would be set, and that the family would see that my belief had made the difference. I told him my belief no longer borrowed against my future. I told him that a man can say he will carry a load, but the strap still bites the shoulder of the one who lifts. He said I was abandoning him. I said I was letting him stand where a man stands. He walked out with his jaw tight and his hands empty. The week turned, and with it something in the way people looked at Mark. At a cousin's birthday dinner in Jefferson Park, the room tilted away from him when the check arrived. No one asked if I would handle it. No one asked him either. The host took the folder and paid, and the talk moved on. Mark laughed a little too loud at a story that did not need it. Later in the hallway by the coat rack, I heard Leo tell another cousin that money had a way of revealing where a spine actually sits. He did not see me. I kept walking. Jessica called Linda from our dining room on Thursday night and did not lower her voice. She said a supervisor had asked whether she was still exploring the transfer to a lower-pressure brand role, then hinted that the pay cut might look better if paired with proof of independence. She said he had smiled in the way managers do when they are being friendly and blunt at the same time. She said she was tired of being teased as the office trust fund. Linda told her people were jealous and that she should ignore them. Jessica said ignoring had not worked. David stopped by after work with a bag from the hardware store and a small bottle of wood glue for the loose rung on a kitchen chair. He sat with me while the glue set and said that his students had asked about the difference between laws and rules and which ones you can ignore. He said he told them that ignoring rules has a cost even when no one catches you. He said he was proud of me. I believed him. The shift showed up in smaller places too. A distributor Mark had charmed for years called the house and asked politely for a forwarding number that would actually reach him. The man said that he had tried 3 times and that voicemail boxes were full. He said in a careful tone that relationships are only as good as their last settled bill. I wrote the number down and thanked him for his patience, then hung up and did not pass it along. The realtor left one more message before the cancellation took hold in every file. She said that if we changed our minds, she would be happy to help us capture value in this exciting market. I threw the flyer into the recycling bin and flattened it with the palm of my hand. The glossy paper creased and made a sound like a small roof giving way. Friday evening, I walked to the corner store for milk. By the register, a local blog headline on a rack caught my eye. It was a piece about small ventures folding after late fees piled up and permits stalled. The photo showed a string of dark windows on a block that used to be brighter. The first comment said that overconfidence is the most expensive ingredient. I paid for the milk and a loaf of bread and walked home in a wind that smelled like snow. That night, Linda told me she had spoken to a friend who said we could still let the realtor in just to get ideas. I said the house was not a puzzle that needed a consultant. I said the trust existed now and that the county had recorded it. She stared at me as if I had moved a wall. She said this was not how families operate. I said families operate in many ways, and that this one was trying aversion with respect. On Saturday morning, I raked the front lawn for the first time in weeks of cold, just to feel the pull on my shoulders. A neighbor walking a dog paused and said he had heard about the birthday, and that he wished he had said something years ago when he saw a pattern he did not like. He said better late than never. I told him that late was still on time for the person who needed it. Emily called while I was hosing mud off the rake. She said the deed had posted and sent me a link for my records. She said to call if anyone tried to set foot inside with a tape measure. I thanked her and said we were all right for now. She laughed and said, "All right," sounded exactly like winning. I told her it felt more like quiet, which is what I had been trying to buy with labor all along. By evening, the house had that warm smell of dust catching sun near the vent covers. I sat at the table with my hands around a mug and listened to a stretch of silence that did not ask anything from me. Somewhere down the block, a child called for a ball, and a dog answered with a bark that was more joy than alarm. My phone buzzed on the table and I turned it face down without checking. The porch light clicked on as the daylight thinned, and I let it glow without thinking about what it cost. I boiled pasta in a dented pot and warmed a jar of sauce in the small pan that has outlived 2 stoves. The radio murmured somewhere between stations. I set 3 plates on the table and wiped a spot the sun had found earlier. When the knock came, it was not urgent, just polite. David stepped in with a bag of salad, and Emily followed with a loaf of bread wrapped in paper. The house seemed to square its shoulders in welcome. We moved around the kitchen the way people do when they have cooked together before. David rinsed the lettuce and spun it dry. Emily sliced the bread and brushed olive oil across the top like a signature. We ate without fuss. David asked about the furnace, and I told him it was humming like a machine that knows its job. Emily said the county record had updated and handed me a printed page with the line that mattered. The trust name right where it should be. She said one more letter had gone out to a lingering contact and that the realtor had replied with a clear acknowledgement. She did not say case closed. She did not have to. We talked about her caseload and his students and the way March in Chicago can pretend to be spring for a day and then argue with itself all week. I told them the porch light had clicked on by itself last night, and I had let it spend a little of my money without scolding it. David smiled at that and asked if I had plans for the backyard once the ground softened. I said the tomatoes would get a new row, and the lilac by the fence needed a ruthless trim. He said he would bring over the good pruning shears. Emily listened and nodded, and I realized she was taking a breath too, the kind a person holds after finishing a bridge and watching someone cross it safely. Another knock came, this one a little sharper. I looked at the door and then at them. David began to rise and I shook my head. I opened the door to find Linda on the step with her coat unbuttoned and a look that wanted to pass for casual. She glanced past me, saw the table, and hesitated the smallest bit. She said she had been in the neighborhood and thought to stop by. I said she could come in if she wanted to talk with respect. She stepped inside and the air changed a degree. She told me that family had concerns, that the way things had unfolded made people uncomfortable, that change could have been handled with a softer hand. I said the softer hand had been mine for decades, and that it had grown calluses no one noticed. She said I had drawn a line in a public way. I said the public part had not been my choice and that paying for my own dismissal had stopped being an option. She asked about the papers she had seen on the table earlier in the week. I said the house now sat in a trust that I controlled. She asked if this was meant to punish our children. I said it was meant to protect my home and my peace. She looked at David and Emily and weighed a sentence and let it go unsaid. Her shoulders settled. She said she had spoken with Mark and that he had felt blindsided. I said I understood feeling, but the facts had been blinking for years, and I had finally looked straight at them. She said Jessica had been embarrassed at work. I said embarrassment passes and that independence would last longer. For a moment her face softened, and the version of her who loves order for the safety it gives showed through the version who loves applause for the reflection it offers. She said she would tell the realtor not to call again. I told her that had already been done. She nodded once and looked around the room as if noticing the corners for the first time. Then she said she would go. I walked her to the door. She paused at the threshold and told me she still wanted holidays to feel like holidays. I said they would for anyone who brought respect with them. After the door closed, we sat back down and finished the salad. Emily said that was progress in a way that does not make noise. David asked if I was all right. I said I was, and I meant it. He poured a little more water into my glass as if to mark the moment, and then asked if I had room in the freezer for extra sauce. We stacked the plates in the sink and washed them without talking about anything important. The quiet felt chosen, not forced. When they left, I walked out to the porch and stood under the light. The block held the usual sounds: a TV playing a game 3 houses down, a bus braking at the corner, wind in wires. My breath rose and thinned, and I did not chase it. I looked at the garden beds hidden under winter and pictured the first green breaking the crust. Life always pushes up if you give it enough room and do not step on it while it is trying. Later, I pulled the top drawer and unwrapped the square of cloth with the ring. I did not put it on. I set it in my palm the way a man sets a compass on a map. I let it cool my skin and warm my thinking. The woman who wore it would have told me I had found the road back to myself, then reminded me that the road keeps going and you have to keep walking it. I put the ring back and slid the drawer closed and listened for the small click that says something is where it belongs. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark landed without preface. He said the bank had declined. He said he was going to try again with a smaller plan and that he did not expect anything from me. He said he would keep me posted. I sat with that for a while. Then I typed a short reply that said, I hoped he would build something steady and that work done in the right order lasts. I did not add money or offers or old habits. He answered with a brief thanks and nothing else. It was better than silence. It was not a repair. Repairs take time and the right tools. Jessica sent a photo of a sunset over the river with a caption about staying late to finish a project no one else wanted. The sky looked like someone had painted hope where hesitation used to sit. I told her it was a good picture and that finishing hard things leaves a mark you can be proud to carry. She replied with a heart and then added that she had said no to a transfer and yes to a class her company offered on budgeting. I told her that sounded like a choice she owned. I went to bed with the window cracked and the radiator ticking out a tune from some earlier decade. In the morning, I woke before the alarm I no longer need and made coffee I no longer water down. I walked out to the porch in my jacket and watched the street lift its head. A kid rode by on a scooter and shouted good morning without slowing. I answered and waved, and the day stepped closer. Here is what I know now. You can love people and still refuse to fund the parts of them that need to grow up. You can keep a home and open its door only to those who carry respect with their laughter. You can work a lifetime and choose to spend the rest of your days buying peace instead of approval. I spent years being a wallet with a man attached. Now I am a man with a name and a key and a porch light that listens for my step. If this reached you, if you have carried a bill that was never yours, say so. Share your story so someone else knows they are not the only one in that room. Like this, share it, subscribe so we can keep telling the kind of truth that makes a house feel steady again. Then turn on your own light and let it glow without asking permission.